If I had known that watching a show called Kino's was going to be so interesting when we don't follow the characters called Kino, I should have hopped onto the source material a lot sooner. And yeah, I'm probably going to mimic myself a lot going forward as we get more of these differing perspectives. I kind of can't help but be excited for the narrative direction and implications of having actual focused characters beyond Kino and Hermes and her master. It makes things, as I'm sure I've said in the episode on Shizu, different. We can see through these different lenses, see how different people react to situations, and juxtapose the ideologies of all of the cast. Kino's for me has never been, let's hop onto a singular political view and jettison the story based on that. It's never been so cut and clear, black and white, but always these really strange splotches of gray. I've always been able to see both sides as having relevant points to whatever is happening. Both sides are right to a certain degree, and it's the job of the characters for me to filter that. Of course, some of them do take action. Well, some of them take a lot of action. And is that good or bad? Some might argue that a character like Kino is being too proactive. Sure, that does go against her character, and that is a problem. But if we look at the other side, Kino is basically just an observer. She waits and sees if she actually does need to do something for her general survival. But actually having her do things and show off that human side of her is great for her character in general. It reminds me that these are characters, human beings, not just caricatures. But of course, we shouldn't break character without a serious developmental moment. That's why I find it so important to have Shizu and the new cast. That's what I want to look at today for this week's episode, the narrative philosophy of Kino's and how that relates to the new cast we're getting. Let's start with the episode and the inclusion of Photo. This was basically an origin story of Photo, and I guess we've gotten 2 origin stories so far, the other being Shizu, and I'm still holding my ass for when we do get Kino's origin story, but yeah, we have Kino's origin story. But either way, we have a slave narrative added to the mix. This to me molds Photo's character. She's been through so much, and upon resolving the narrative she was in, learns a lot from her experiences. Similarly, Shizu takes the experiences he has and turns into this very hyperactive person. He sees injustice and he acts. He's very in your face, and that's representative of the revenge that brought him up. He had been dealt injustices, and his entire life till the events of Kino has been to strive and enact his revenge. His backstory molded who he was. The same could even be said for Kino herself. Major spoilers yet to be seen in the show, so spoiler warning now, but her backstory was basically watching Kino die. She's been indoctrinated into this country, doesn't realize what it actually means to be an adult, and losing all desires. Thinking of it now, she's basically in this dystopian society. Her country is actually just a microcosm of dystopia, since that's what they do. They just produce adults that work and do nothing else. But of course, with being dystopia, the main character always finds a way and figures out the workings of the system. Kino was that person, except she had to do it through a more visceral method. She ran away from her country, watching and doing nothing, which really fits her character. She watches and really doesn't do anything, and when she does, it's mainly for her survival. Sure, in her backstory, she can't really fight back against a horde of dystopian zombies, but hey, it's still a parallel. Running away is just one form of fighting and taking action. Once again, backstory here molds character, and that's not even the full extent of her backstory. She still has master's training, which explains her gunslinging in current time. So what does Photo's backstory tell us? Well, that's actually an interesting case considering I don't actually know any of the stories she'll go through. But can I predict what she does do when tasked with a situation? I mean, I've already failed predicting that they'll show us Kino's backstory arc, but I'll try anyway. Through the narrative philosophy of having backstory relate to how they'll react to the situations they're put in, we should be seeing Photo take a very humble approach to things. And I say this in conjunction with how she reacts to committing accidental genocide. She actually still feels guilty, in a way. Sure, her first reaction was, I hope you all die, but right after, she attempts suicide. She wants to join them, and due to her own beliefs, she really does think that's a better salvation than just living. Before this incident, she's always held life in this very positive light that really no slave of her situation should feel. And this is the basis of where I think her humbleness and her gentle attitude would derive from. I think, moving on, Photo understands how cruel the world is, but due to her actually having felt it, will have a great deal of sympathy moving forward. She'll be the kind of person who understands the wrongdoings and sufferings and injustice, and yet will face that with a smile. I feel like her perspective would play very similar to Kino's passive demeanor. She'd see what was happening, understand what was happening, and maybe try to guide the situation to a more positive light, but ultimately isn't overtly pushy about that ideal. After all, at one point of her life, she was entirely fine with being a slave, so she also understands that not everyone may actually be asking for help, and that maybe people just enjoy living the lives they have. In the same vein, if push comes to shove, she can probably hold her own since she did learn how to use a gun. She's probably way too passive to be slinging that thing around, but maybe we'll see some photo shooting action, pun intended. It's really interesting not only to see how these characters react to the situations they're put in, but also to see how they formed their ideals as well. For me, these characters are, well, actual characters. They feel human, and they act like human, and are influenced by their past like humans. And I think it's also important to notice that they aren't running from their past either. They aren't afraid to face their past, nor are they bogged down by their past. I feel like they are who they are in spite of what has happened, and they move beyond just mimicking themselves. And I only say this because of how varied they can act. Kino should just be a silent watcher, but she does intervene, so even if she mostly can be read through her backstory, she still has complexity. And that's what I really like about the choice of showing this parallel of past and present, and then diverging from that to show us that these are people. It makes the show much more immersive for me, and really sets it apart from other shows of the same vein that may have a wide variety of casts that fit into these linear molds. That's really important for a show like Kino that is slice of life. To repeat the same formula over and over is something not a lot of shows or narratives can or should do. After a few episodes, it'll become really old, and the point of the story becomes vapid. It loses meaning if the plot or the characters don't progress. There should be new things happening in the world, or, in our case, other people who inevitably inhabit the same world of Kino. It just makes sense since this world is so vast, with so many other opinions to follow and lenses to explore. And Kino just so happens to organically fit those elements within its narrative, and that's a good example of good writing. And it also makes me really sad if we don't get a follow-up to this in another season. That was Analyze, the show where I take different animes and put them into the sphere of analysis. We're doing a very, very heavy focused Kino's month or season, so if you haven't checked out the other Kino's episodes and is following Kino's, maybe check those out, or maybe check out Girls Last Tour, which I've recently put out an episode on. Anyways, I'm Brian, signing out.